What's up, listeners? It's the Russian dude. Let's get straight to the point and talk about some ridiculous Russian propaganda. Okay. Today we're gonna talk about, yes, Vladimir Putin visiting Vietnam. Literally, I could not put this section as a ridiculous Russian propaganda, soon you'll know why. Long story short, one of the very first statements he made is that Russia appreciates Vietnam so much for its balanced position about the war in Ukraine. Basically, thank you for supporting Russia. According to Putin, this is a balanced position. On the other hand, Vietnam acknowledged that they welcome that Vladimir Putin was re-elected as the president of Russia back in this year, 2024. They don't see any questions about legitimacy here. And both Russia and Vietnam, they want to increase the mutual cooperation in as many different fields, sectors and industries of the economy. And both countries are also against putting nuclear weapons into space. Literally pretty much the same very day whenever Putin said that we have nuclear weapons on standby, just don't you dare do something bad against our country. This was a relatively shorter trip in comparison to North Korea, which lasted for 2 days. And long story short, whenever Putin came back to Russia, he gave a press conference talking about the visit into these two countries, and this is just a very basic summary. First of all, he did mention, even though he went to North Korea and Vietnam, the very first thing he mentioned that the West will remove President of Ukraine Zelensky in the first half of 2025. Next thing Putin mentioned is that this ultimatum he gave Ukraine approximately several days ago about these so-called peace negotiations will probably not last forever, and this will change based on the situation on the front lines. Then he was also complaining, as always, about the West sending weapons to Ukraine, and in response to that, Russia will supply its own weapons to undisclosed countries, so that the West will be very cautious and will be very puzzled which country now have the Russian weapons. And ultimately Putin concluded that in case Ukraine comes up with their own peace negotiations solutions, as long as this one will have the statement, the point about Russia removing its army from the territory of Ukraine, in this case there will be no peace negotiations at all. This is a nonsense, according to Putin. Because if you want to end war, you still have to make your soldiers present in another country, however much sense this logic makes. And then Putin literally summarized that for as long as the Kyiv regime, the Kyiv authorities are in power, the Russian army will always be present on the territory of Ukraine, because apparently now the main goal of the special military operation is to change the government authorities of Ukraine, pretty much declaring that for now, this war will be indefinite. And while Russia is doing its best to do very suspicious alliances, Ukraine and the West, they continue to advance their mutual cooperation. That is why recently, according to the representatives of the United States, every single Patriot air defense order moving forward will be prioritized in favor of Ukraine, which basically means in case there are any country who ordered these air defense systems, for now they will go to Ukraine first and foremost. Specifically, the countries which already ordered, according to the Pentagon, are Poland, Romania, Germany and Spain. And besides this, every single missile for Patriot air defense system will go to Ukraine as well. And speaking about one of these countries, Romania specifically, they voluntarily gave up their own air defense system Patriot in favor of Ukraine. The goal here is to help Ukraine protect its sky as much as possible, so they don't have to worry about it that much. Of course they will always worry, but at least not that much, so that they can focus instead on the counteroffensive. Because let's be honest, the massive attacks of Russians against multiple cities of Ukraine at once, unfortunately they intensified recently. Specifically, last night there was yet another attack, as you can see from this map. This is where the major cities were targeted, and the next map shows the directions where Russian missiles and drones were coming from. But fortunately, Ukrainian air defense was pretty good this last night, intercepting 5 out of 9 missiles and every single 27 Shahid drones. In response to that, Ukrainians themselves were able to attack yet another oil refinery and storage of Russians, and this one is located in Tambov, as you can see from this video, and we even already have a satellite image which shows that the damages are pretty extensive. And speaking about the actual update from the front lines, specifically from Kharkiv, Ukrainians were able to push Russian army away from the small settlement called Tihe. Ukrainian army still continues to maintain the encirclement of Russians who are trapped on the factory in Vovchansk, and I guess this is in some way is related to the next thing I'm gonna say, is that Russians for the very first time used the massive FAB 3000 with the warhead total weight of being 3 tons. And well, the consequences are truly destructive, and yes, they continue to use this against cities where civilians still remain. In Seversk, Russians attempted yet another offensive and Ukrainians were able to repel it relatively easy, destroying 7 personnel and then 2 armored vehicles. In Chasiv Yar, right here is the video, we can see where a Ukrainian armored vehicle is driving to the outskirts of the city, I'm assuming following the retreating Russians, and then they are being under the artillery fire, which helps Russians to retreat. And just in general, right here we have yet another compilation video of the FPV drone footage, and right here we can see the destruction of T-72 tanks and a couple of artillery systems, Strela-10 and Msta-S. By the way, before I forget, every single photo and video, the uncensored and full versions, guys, you will be able to find on my Patreon as always, and right now there is 1 week of free access for every single one of you to try the service to see if you like it or not, so it literally costs nothing to try. The link to my Patreon is down below, literally the best way to support my work. Thank you guys. And yet the most extraordinary event which happened relatively recently is that we have a Ukrainian civilian who was previously living on the territory of occupied Donetsk region. Long story short, whenever Russians captured this settlement, they started to forcefully mobilize the local men into the Russian army. Well, you cannot simply tell the local men who are always Ukrainians, who are thinking that they are Ukrainians, who live on Ukrainian territory after all. You cannot simply tell them that now you're Russian, here is your Russian passport, enjoy the benefits. Please don't forget to come to the military enlistment office next week, because now we need you to fight against literally your own comrades and neighbors. And so apparently some Ukrainian men did not want to wait until they are being forcefully summoned, such as for example this guy Galushka Yuri Nikolaevich. And guess what? He started a contract with the Ministry of Defense of Russia himself. He said them like, finally, thank you so much for liberating me, pretty much following their exact propaganda, so he does not draw any suspicions, right? So whenever he got accepted into the Russian army, I only wonder how much of a background check he had to go through. Probably none. Well, kinda shows you that the army is desperate for people. But that's not important. What is important is that this guy only several days or weeks later after joining the Z army literally eliminated the entire squad of Z soldiers. And this included 1 commander as well. Since then, since this event happened, not that much news were heard about this particular guy, which to be honest, if you think about it, kinda makes sense. The propaganda will never in the universe, never in the whole entire world will acknowledge that they accepted a Ukrainian citizen into the ranks of the Z army, who then sabotaged, who apparently became an undercover Ukrainian soldier and eliminated the Russian soldiers themselves. I mean, imagine the propaganda talking about during the prime hours of their national federal TV channels. It just will simply never happen. What is much easier for the Z propaganda is to bite the bullet, is to just ignore this fact, to punch the air, like things like this, and say, okay, whatever, let's not talk about this, let's forget this guy, he already escaped, he's most likely fighting alongside Ukrainians right now, we take the loss, and we continue moving forward. But wait, there is more. Apparently, Russians do not learn their lessons at all, because right here is the report by the British intelligence, which shows that they decided to continue doing exactly the same. They went on the occupied territories in Zaporozhye, they tried to force Russian passports on those Ukrainians and said, well, now you're Russian. And since you're now Russian, well, you know that in Russia the military service is mandatory, right? So please pack your things, get food for a couple of days, and please join us in the military training barracks because, well, we need men along the front lines. Well, as you can see, it was only one guy who was able to eliminate the entire squad. Now imagine if there are dozens or even hundreds of the very similar Ukrainians who have a very big motivation to repeat exactly the same thing, to do exactly the same, because most likely they can anticipate, can assume that there will be not that many actions for their, not going to be too many consequences for their actions. So there you have it, guys. Please like this video, subscribe to my channel, because unfortunately YouTube for some reason again started removing subscribers from my channel. Please go ahead and check if your subscription is still active. Go ahead and check other useful links down below, my PayPal donations, Patreon subscription, Instagram, and of course merch, hoodies, t-shirts, pants, cases, Adidas hats, all this kind of stuff you can find down below. Thanks so much for watching, see you tomorrow.
And dance and never brew with a smile.